Have you ever felt invisible? Have you ever walked through a crowded room, or a bustling office, and felt like a ghost, a shadow that no one truly sees? We build walls around ourselves, and around others, sorting people into boxes based on their job titles, their clothes, their perceived station in life. We see the uniform, but not the person wearing it. We see the task, but not the talent hidden behind it. This is a story about those walls, and about what happens when someone finally dares to look over them. My son mocked me, his words a casual dart thrown across the expensive marble of our kitchen island. "You can't buy love, Mom," he'd said, a cynical smirk playing on his lips as I signed yet another check for a charity gala I was too busy to attend. He saw my wealth as a shield, a tool, a clumsy substitute for genuine connection. And perhaps, in that moment, he was right. I was Eleanor Vance, CEO of a tech empire, a woman who lived in a world of data streams and stock projections, a world where everything had a price, a value, a return on investment. But life, in its infinite and mysterious wisdom, was about to teach me a lesson about value that no balance sheet could ever capture. It was a lesson that began in the sterile silence of a skyscraper late at night, with a problem my millions couldn't solve, and a hero no one had ever thought to look for. It started with an unsolvable equation on a whiteboard and the quiet shuffle of a cleaner's shoes. The problem was a ghost, a phantom that lived deep within the code of our flagship project, Odyssey. It was our future, a revolutionary piece of software set to redefine global logistics. But the ghost was crippling it. It created minute, untraceable errors, tiny corruptions that compounded over time, threatening to bring the entire system crashing down before it ever launched. For weeks, my top engineers, minds I'd poached from rivals with staggering salaries, were stumped. They camped out in the main conference room, the war room, its glass walls covered in a frantic scroll of algorithms and failed hypotheses. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and rising panic. I lived in that room with them, my world shrinking to the glowing screens and the tightening knot in my stomach. The pressure from the board was immense, but it was nothing compared to the pressure I put on myself. This was my legacy. My entire career had been a climb, a relentless push towards this summit. And now, inches from the peak, I was staring into an abyss. One night, defeated, I stood alone before the largest whiteboard. It was a chaotic mural of failure. I saw the faces of my team reflected in the glass, exhausted and hopeless. I saw my own, edged with a fatigue that ran deeper than sleeplessness. Julian's words echoed in my mind. "You solve every problem with a checkbook, Mom." He saw me as transactional, a commander who moved pieces on a board, not a leader who inspired. He didn't see the passion, the belief I had in what we were building. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't care. I turned away, the weight of it all pressing down on me, and went to my office to stare out at the city lights, each one a distant star in a galaxy I no longer felt a part of. That was when Samuel entered the war room. He was part of the night crew, a man so quiet he was practically invisible. I knew his name only from a roster. I'd passed him in the halls 100 times, his gaze always lowered, his presence as unassuming as the gentle hum of the building's ventilation. He moved with a practiced economy, his cart gliding silently over the polished concrete floors. His job was to erase the day's work, to wipe the boards clean, reset the stage for the next day's battle. He pushed his cart into the room, the faint scent of cleaning solution cutting through the stale air. He paused before the main whiteboard, his eyes, dark and thoughtful, scanning the frantic equations. Foremost, it would be gibberish. A meaningless scroll of numbers and symbols. But Samuel saw something else. He saw a language he understood. He saw a story, a flawed narrative with a single, elegant sentence out of place. His hand, calloused from work, twitched. He hadn't touched a marker in years. That part of his life was over, buried under a mountain of grief and responsibility. But the logic, the pure, crystalline beauty of the problem, called to him. It was a song he couldn't help but hum along to. Almost against his will, his fingers closed around a dry erase marker left on the ledge. The cap came off with a soft pop that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. For a brief, intoxicating moment, he wasn't a cleaner. He was who he used to be. With a few swift, certain strokes, he altered a single line of the core algorithm. He didn't solve the whole puzzle, but he corrected the foundational error, the flawed premise upon which all their other failed attempts had been built. It was a subtle, beautiful fix. A whisper of a solution. Then, as quickly as it came, the impulse was gone. Panic seized him. He looked at what he'd done, his own handwriting a foreign object on that sacred wall. With a damp cloth from his cart, he frantically scrubbed the ink away, his heart pounding against his ribs. He wiped it clean, leaving only the faintest ghost of his correction, a barely perceptible smudge on the gleaming white surface. He finished his duties, his hands trembling slightly, and disappeared back into the building's quiet corridors, leaving the room pristine, silent, and unknowingly, fundamentally changed. When I returned a few minutes later, drawn back by some restless urge, the room was empty. The board was clean, ready for another day of failure. But as I approached it, something caught my eye. A faint shadow. The ghost of an equation. It was where the core algorithm had been written, but the structure was different. It was elegant. Simpler. My mind, weary as it was, latched onto it. I grabbed a marker and rewrote the line, as I remembered it from the faint impression. A jolt went through me. It was a perspective we hadn't considered, a path we hadn't explored. It wasn't the answer, but it was a new question, a new door in a house we thought had no more rooms. I turned, scanning the empty room, the silent hallway. Who had been in here? A wave of confusion and a strange, electric thrill washed over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. I didn't know it yet, but my lesson had just begun. I wasn't just searching for a bug in the code anymore. I was searching for a ghost in the machine. A ghost who wrote in the language of genius. My obsession with the whiteboard ghost, as my team began to call it, grew into a quiet mania. I started leaving bait every night. I would isolate a specific, thorny problem from the Odyssey project, a complex function, or a logical paradox, and write it out on the main board before I left. I'd pretend to give up, leaving the marker on the ledge as a silent invitation. Then, I would wait. The first few nights, nothing happened. The board would be wiped clean in the morning, the problem erased without a trace. I felt a pang of disappointment, a fear that my one flicker of hope had been a fluke, a figment of my exhausted imagination. My lead engineer, a brilliant but cynical man named Mark, pulled me aside. "Eleanor," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "we are all exhausted. Maybe you're seeing patterns that aren't there. We should focus on our existing avenues." He thought I was cracking under the pressure. Maybe I was. Julian certainly thought so. He'd visited the office, a rare occurrence, and saw me staring intently at the empty whiteboard. "Still trying to solve the world's problems, Mom?" he asked, his tone laced with that familiar, weary sarcasm. "You know, for someone who runs a multi-billion-dollar company, you spend a lot of time staring at a blank wall." I didn't have the energy to argue, to explain the strange hope that this blank wall now represented. I just said, "It's important, Julian," he scoffed. "Everything is important to you, except the things that are actually here." He gestured vaguely at the world outside my office window, the world he felt I'd abandoned. "You can't buy a solution to this, can you? It's really eating at you." His words stung, because they were partially true. My money was useless here. My authority was useless. I was facing a problem that required a different kind of currency, pure, unadulterated insight. And then, on the fourth night, it happened again. I came in before dawn, my heart thumping with a nervous anticipation. There, on the board, was the problem I had left. And underneath it, a single, elegant line of pseudocode. It wasn't a full solution, but a hint. A key. It reframed the problem in a way that was so simple, so obvious in retrospect, that I laughed out loud in the empty room. It was brilliant. The ghost had returned. This time, I took a picture before it could be erased. I presented the key to my team, not as a mysterious clue, but as a new direction I had conceived. I couldn't tell them the truth, they'd think I was insane. Mark was skeptical, but the logic was undeniable. We spent the day following the ghost's lead, and for the first time, we made real progress. We broke through a wall that had blocked us for a month. The energy in the war room shifted from despair to a frantic, hopeful excitement. That evening, a new character entered the drama. Mr. Davies, the head of building operations. He was a man who lived by the book, a petty tyrant whose power came from enforcing rules. He saw the world in a rigid hierarchy, executives, employees, and support staff. And he policed the boundaries between them with a zealous vigilance. He found me in the war room after hours, staring at the board where I was preparing the next problem. Ms. Vance, he began, his tone stiff and formal. I wanted to alert you to a minor security concern. We've had reports of one of the night cleaners loitering. Specifically, in this conference room. My head snapped up. Loitering. Lingering after his duties are complete, Davies clarified, his lips thin with disapproval. His name is Samuel. I've had to speak to him before about it. He seems distracted. I've assured him that his only concern should be the timely and efficient execution of his tasks. We can't have the cleaning staff getting ideas above their station. The phrase above their station hung in the air, ugly and archaic. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Samuel. The quiet man. Could it be? It seemed impossible. But the timing. What does he look like? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Davies described him perfectly. Quiet. Unassuming. Dark, thoughtful eyes. I'll be monitoring the situation, Davies concluded, puffing out his chest slightly. Rest assured, Ms. Vance, there will be no further disturbances. He strode away, a man satisfied with his own diligence. I stood there, my mind racing. A cleaner. A man paid to be invisible, to erase the thoughts of others, might be the very person saving my company. The irony was staggering. The injustice of Davies's prejudice was infuriating. That night, I didn't just leave a problem on the board. I left a message. Beside the complex algorithm, I wrote a simple question: why do you hide? The next morning, I arrived at the office with a sense of dread and anticipation so sharp it was almost painful. The conference room was, as always, immaculate. The board was clean. But on the ledge, tucked neatly under the eraser, was a folded piece of paper. My hands trembled as I opened it. The handwriting was neat, precise. It wasn't an answer to my question. It was a complete, multi-page solution to the algorithm I had left, mapped out with a level of detail and foresight that made my breath catch in my throat. It didn't just solve the problem, it anticipated future issues and built in elegant safeguards. It was the work of a master architect. I sank into a chair, the papers clutched in my hand. It was him. It was Samuel. The man Mr. Davies had dismissed as a loiterer, a man getting ideas above his station, was a genius. A prodigy. My company, my legacy, my entire future was being held together by the quiet brilliance of the man who emptied my trash cans. A fierce, protective anger surged through me. How many Samuels were there in the world? How many brilliant minds were trapped by circumstance, relegated to the shadows by the casual prejudice of men like Davies? That day, I instructed my head of security to give me access to the camera feeds for the executive conference rooms. I felt a pang of guilt at the invasion of privacy, but I had to know. I had to see him. That night, I sat in my office, the lights dimmed, watching the live feed on my monitor. The hours ticked by. My team left, their voices echoing in the hall, filled with a renewed optimism thanks to the ghost's latest contribution. The building grew quiet. Then, just after midnight, the door to the war room swung open. Samuel entered, pushing his cart. He moved with that same quiet efficiency, gathering trash, wiping down the tables. He saved the whiteboard for last. He stood before it, just as I'd imagined, his posture changing subtly. The weary slump of a laborer was replaced by the focused intensity of a scholar. He studied the new problem I had left, his head tilted. He reached for the marker. And then he began to write. It was like watching a master composer at a piano. His hand flew across the board, the lines of code flowing from him not with the hesitation of someone solving a problem, but with the certainty of someone revealing an answer that was already there, fully formed, in his mind. He was so engrossed, so lost in the world of pure logic, that he didn't notice the door opening behind him. Mr. Davies stood in the doorway, his face a mask of smug vindication. I knew it, he said, his voice sharp and loud, shattering the silence. Samuel froze, the marker still in his hand. He spun around, his face pale with shock and fear. He looked like a child caught doing something terribly wrong. What do you think you're doing, touching that board? Davies barked, striding into the room. This is executive property. Your job is to clean it, not to deface it with your scribbles. I'm sorry, sir, Samuel stammered, his voice barely a whisper. He instinctively started to wipe the board with his sleeve. Don't bother, Davies sneered. I've seen enough. You're done. Pack your things. I won't have my staff vandalizing company property. From my office, watching on the monitor, my blood ran cold. I saw the terror on Samuel's face, the crushing humiliation. I saw the smug triumph on Davis. I was on my feet and out the door before I even registered the decision. I ran. I didn't walk. I didn't stride. I ran down the hallway, my heels clicking frantically against the polished floor. I burst into the war room. That's enough, Davies, I commanded, my voice sharp with an authority that made both men flinch. Davies's face shifted from triumph to confusion. Ms. Vance, I was just handling a disciplinary issue. This employee was. I know exactly what he was doing, I interrupted, walking to stand between them, turning my back on Davies to face Samuel. My anger at Davies was eclipsed by a profound sense of shame. This brilliant man was being fired for saving us. I looked at Samuel, who was staring at the floor, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Samuel, I said, my voice softer now. Is that your work? He couldn't meet my eyes. He just gave a small, defeated nod. I turned back to Davies. His face was a picture of bewilderment. Mr. Davies, I said, my voice dangerously calm. This man's scribbles, as you call them, have done more to advance our most critical project in the last week than my entire team of senior engineers has in the last month. You are not firing him. You are leaving this room. Now Davies opened his mouth, then closed it. He saw the look in my eyes and knew there was no arguing. He shot a venomous, confused glare at Samuel before turning and stalking out of the room. The silence he left behind was heavy. I turned back to Samuel. He still wouldn't look at me. He was trembling. I'm sorry, he whispered. I know I shouldn't have. I'll clean it off. I'll go. No, I said, my voice firm but gentle. You won't. I want you to look at me. Samuel slowly, hesitantly, he lifted his head. His eyes were filled with a deep, weary sadness, but also a flicker of the intelligence I had seen on the security camera. Who are you? I asked softly. I mean, Who were you before you came to work here? He swallowed hard, the story locked behind years of silence. I was a student, he said, his voice raspy. At MIT. I was top of my class in computational theory. I had a full scholarship, the pieces clicked into place. The raw, innate talent. The deep understanding. What happened? I asked. His gaze drifted to a worn photo taped to the inside of his cart's supply caddy. A picture of a smiling young girl. My sister, he said simply. She got sick. A rare genetic disorder. The treatments, they weren't covered. My parents were gone. It was just me. I had to drop out. I took any job I could find. 2 jobs. 3. The bills, they never stop. He wiped a hand across his face, a gesture of profound exhaustion. Cleaning at night pays well. It's quiet. It lets me be there for her during the day. He looked back at the whiteboard, at the elegant lines of code. The math, the problems. I see them on the boards your teams leave up. Sometimes, I can't help myself. It's like a puzzle that begs to be solved. It helps me forget. For a little while, I felt a profound ache in my chest, a mixture of awe and fury. This man had sacrificed his own brilliant future for his family, and the world had rewarded him with a mop and the scorn of men like Davies. My son's words came back to me again. You can't buy love. No, you couldn't. But you could honor it. You could recognize the sacrifice born of it. Samuel, I said, my voice filled with a conviction I hadn't felt in years. Your days of working in the shadows are over. The next 48 hours were a blow of calculated chaos. The Odyssey project was teetering on the brink of catastrophic failure. A new, more virulent version of the bug had emerged, and it was no longer creating small errors. It was actively corrupting our core data, eating the system from the inside out. The launch was a week away. Panic was a palpable thing in the building, a low-frequency hum of anxiety. My board of directors was calling emergency meetings, their voices sharp with accusation and fear. Mark and his team were officially defeated. They came to my office, their faces ashen. It's over, Eleanor, Mark said, his voice hollow. The architecture is fundamentally flawed. We'd have to rebuild it from the ground up. It would take a year, maybe more. We have to pull the plug. I listened to them, my face unreadable. I let them lay out the full scope of the disaster. When they were finished, I simply said, thank you. Go home. Get some rest. Be back here tomorrow morning at 9. They stared at me, confused by my calm. As they left, I made a call. Not to a consultant, not to a rival company for a buyout, but to the pediatric wing of the city hospital. I arranged for the best specialist in the country to be flown in to consult on his sister's case, my personal fortune guaranteeing any and all expenses. Then, I found Samuel. He was in a small, windowless utility closet on the sublevel, a place that smelled of bleach and despair. He was on his break, eating a sandwich from a brown paper bag and reading a tattered, decade-old textbook on quantum computing. He looked up as I entered, his eyes wide with alarm, expecting the other shoe to drop, expecting me to tell him Davies had won after all. I'm not here to fire you, Samuel, I said quickly. I'm here to offer you a job. Not as a cleaner. As the lead architect of the Odyssey project, he stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. He shook his head slowly. You don't understand. I don't have a degree. I haven't worked in the field for almost 10 years. I'm a cleaner. I don't care what it says on your resume, I replied, my voice unwavering. I care what's in your mind. I've seen your work. You see this system in a way no one else does. You see the whole picture. My team of experts sees only the broken pieces. I need you. I told him about the arrangements I'd made for his sister. His eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, he didn't look away. He looked at me, and I saw not just gratitude, but the fierce, burning light of a mind that had been starved for too long. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. The next morning, the boardroom was a tomb. The board members sat around the long mahogany table, their faces grim. My senior executive team lined the walls, avoiding eye contact. Mark and his engineers stood near the whiteboard, looking like men awaiting a verdict. The tension was so thick I could feel it pressing on my skin. I stood at the head of the table. "Good morning," I said, my voice ringing with a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "As you know, the Odyssey project is on the verge of collapse. My team has concluded that the architecture is unsalvageable." Murmurs of anger and disappointment rippled through the room. The chairman, a stern man named Arthur, slammed his pen down. "So this is it, Eleanor. You're admitting defeat. Years of investment, down the drain." "No, Arthur," I said, holding his gaze. "I'm not. I'm telling you that my team was wrong. They were looking at the problem from the wrong perspective. But I have found someone who sees it correctly." On cue, the boardroom doors opened. Samuel walked in. He wasn't wearing his cleaner's uniform. I had my assistant buy him a simple, but well-fitting suit that morning. But he still moved with a quiet uncertainty, his eyes wide as he took in the room full of powerful, skeptical faces. A wave of confusion and derision washed over the room. I saw Mr. Davies, who I'd insisted be present, smirk from the back. "This is your savior, Eleanor." Arthur scoffed. "Who is he?" "This," I announced, my voice clear and proud, "is Samuel Reyes. And he is going to save this company." I gestured to the whiteboard. "Samuel, if you would." He walked towards the board, his steps hesitant. He picked up a marker, his hand shaking. He looked back at me, his eyes pleading. I gave him a firm, encouraging nod. He took a deep breath and turned to the board. And then, the transformation happened again. The fear fell away. The room full of powerful people disappeared. It was just him and the problem. He began to speak, his voice soft at first, but gaining strength with every word. He didn't talk about code. He talked about philosophy. About the flawed assumption at the heart of their system. He wiped the board clean and began to draw. Not lines of code, but diagrams, elegant webs of logic. He deconstructed their entire billion-dollar platform with a few strokes of a marker. He explained how the Ghost wasn't a bug, but a logical consequence of their initial design, a system fighting its own nature. The engineers, led by Mark, began to lean forward, their skepticism melting into fascination, then dawning comprehension. They started murmuring, nodding. They were seeing it. "So," Samuel said, turning from the board, "we don't need to patch it. We need to teach it. The architecture isn't flawed. It's just incomplete." He then laid out a solution so radical, so breathtakingly simple and elegant, that the room was stunned into absolute silence. He hadn't just fixed the bug. He had unlocked a potential in the system none of them had ever dreamed of. Standing in the back of the room, unseen by most, was my son. I had called Julian and told him to come to the office, to witness the end of my legacy. I wanted him to see my failure, to see that I was, perhaps, the transactional, check-writing automaton he believed me to be. But now, he wasn't seeing a failure. He was watching a quiet, unassuming man in an ill-fitting suit hold a room of titans captive with the sheer power of his intellect. He saw the awe on Mark's face. He saw the stunned respect on the chairman's. And he saw his mother, standing tall, her face glowing with a fierce, unwavering belief, not in a project, but in a person. In that moment, watching Samuel command the room, Julian finally understood. His mother hadn't bought a solution. She had invested in a soul. She had looked past the uniform and seen the genius within. It wasn't about money. It was about sight. The aftermath in the boardroom was electric. The silence was broken by Arthur, the chairman, who rose slowly to his feet and began to applaud. One by one, the other board members joined him, followed by the executives, and finally, Mark and his entire engineering team. They weren't just applauding a solution, they were acknowledging a miracle. Samuel stood by the whiteboard, overwhelmed, the marker still in his hand, as the applause washed over him. I walked to his side and put a hand on his shoulder. "Welcome to the team, Mr. Reyes," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The new title, Mr. Reyes, sealed the transformation. He was no longer the invisible cleaner, he was the architect of their future. In the days that followed, the company was revitalized. Under Samuel's guidance, the engineering team worked with a renewed sense of purpose. They weren't just fixing a problem, they were building something beautiful, something revolutionary, based on his vision. Samuel, in turn, blossomed. Given the resources and the respect he had long been denied, his mind soared. He was a natural leader, not through command, but through a quiet, humble brilliance that inspired everyone around him. He never lost that humility. His first act after officially accepting the position of Chief Systems Architect was to formalize the scholarship program I had promised. The Second Chance Scholarship, it was called, designed to fund the education of individuals who had to leave their chosen fields due to family or financial hardship. The first recipient was a night shift security guard who had been studying to be a nurse before his father fell ill. As for Mr. Davies, I called him into my office. He was pale and defiant. I didn't fire him. That felt too easy. Instead, I reassigned him. His new job was to personally oversee the management of the Second Chance Scholarship. He would be responsible for reading the applications, for interviewing the candidates, for seeing the faces, and hearing the stories of the people his prejudice had taught him to ignore. "Your performance will be judged," I told him, "on your ability to see potential where others only see a uniform." It was a lesson in empathy, a forced re-education of the soul. That evening, as I was packing my briefcase to leave at a reasonable hour for the first time in months, Julian appeared in my doorway. He didn't lean against the frame with his usual casual indifference. He stood straight, his hands in his pockets, his expression serious. "I saw what you did, Mom," he said quietly. I paused, waiting. "In the boardroom?" With that man, with Samuel, he walked into the office and stood by the great window overlooking the city. "All my life, I've seen you write checks. For schools, for museums, for my trust fund. It always felt empty. Like you were paying a tax on your guilt for not being there." He turned to face me, and his eyes were clear, free of the cynicism that had clouded them for so long. "But what you did for him, that wasn't a transaction. You didn't just give him money. You gave him a platform. You gave him a voice. You saw him when no one else did, not even himself." He took a breath, the words catching in his throat. "You were right. You didn't buy his loyalty. You earned it by seeing his worth. You didn't buy love, you invested in a person." It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. The wall between us, built over years of my ambition and his resentment, finally crumbled. I walked over to him, and for the first time since he was a little boy, I hugged my son, and he hugged me back. In that embrace, I felt a return on an investment more valuable than any stock or asset. I had my son back. 6 months later, the world looked different from my office window. The Odyssey platform had launched to universal acclaim, not just as a logistical tool, but as a new paradigm in adaptive systems, all thanks to Samuel's core philosophy. Our stock had tripled. But more than that, the culture of the company had changed. We were no longer just a tech giant, we were a place of opportunity. Samuel, now a respected and beloved leader, made a point of walking the floors every day, talking to everyone from the mailroom clerks to the baristas, asking them about their dreams, their hidden talents. We discovered a woman in accounting with a gift for graphic design. She now led our marketing visuals. We found a janitor, who was a self-taught expert in cybersecurity. He was now a key member of our digital defense team. The whole building was humming with a new kind of energy, the energy of recognized potential. I found I didn't need to be in the office 16 hours a day anymore. I had built a team I could trust, a community. I had dinner with Julian 3 times a week. We talked, truly talked, about our lives, our hopes. He had started volunteering, mentoring kids from underprivileged backgrounds, telling them that their circumstances didn't define their worth. He was passing on the lesson Samuel had taught us all. One evening, Samuel and I stood at that same office window, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. His sister was in a new clinical trial and was responding well, her laughter, he told me, finally returning. We weren't talking about work. We were just two people, a former CEO and a former cleaner, enjoying a moment of shared peace. "Thank you, Eleanor," he said softly, his gaze on the horizon. For everything, I turned to him, a genuine smile on my face. "No, thank you, Samuel. You came here to clean our floors. But you ended up cleaning our windows, so we could all see more clearly." He gave me a small, humble smile, the smile of a man who was finally, completely, seen. "My son told me you can't buy love, and he was absolutely right. You can't purchase respect with a salary or loyalty with a bonus. Real value isn't found in a bank account, it's found in the human heart, in the untapped potential that lies dormant in every single person, waiting for someone to give it a chance to catch the light." We walk past greatness every single day. The person who serves you coffee, the one who drives your bus, the one who cleans your office late at night. They all have a story. They all have a gift. My journey with Samuel taught me that the greatest investment you can ever make is to look past the surface, to see the dignity and the genius hidden in plain sight. So I ask you, who is the Samuel in your life? Whose potential are you overlooking? Look closer. Listen harder. The most extraordinary people are often the ones we've trained ourselves not to see. Remind someone today that you see them, that their worth is not defined by their job title, but by the content of their character and the power of their dreams. Share this story, not just for me, but for all the hidden gems waiting to be discovered.